Hello and welcome to the first edition of Asia Pacific Society of Association Executive Leadership Conversations. I am Prashant Saha, President of Asia Pacific Society of Association Executives. Across Asia Pacific, association leaders are facing real pressure. Member expectations are changing, revenue models are shifting, collaboration is becoming more complex in the present geopolitical situation. But there hasn't been a truly regional space to talk about this openly. And that's why APSAE is being created, a platform for senior association leaders across APAC region to connect, exchange ideas, and learn from each other. In this series, I keep it simple, real conversation with people who are shaping the future of association. If you are leading an association in this region, this is certainly for you. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Bruce Rosenthal. Bruce is an experienced corporate sponsor and partnership strategist, consultant, and author, specializing in association and nonprofits. Through his work, Bruce Rosenthal Associates, he has been a strong advocate for helping organizations boost revenue, enhance member value, and build long-term sustainability. With deep experience advising association globally, Bruce brings a very practical perspective on how organizations can rethink their approach to sponsorship and financial models. Bruce, it is a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Bruce, let me start with a very broader question. From your perspective, how much association evolved today to remain both relevant and financially sustainable, especially in an environment where members' expectations are changing rapidly?
I think one of the first keys for associations to remain relevant today is to do a competitive analysis. And we often talk about competitive analyses in the for-profit sector, how many restaurants or other businesses are there down the street selling a similar product or service. But associations, from my work with them, it's becoming increasingly competitive. And when I started really consulting about 8 years ago, a few years before COVID, we'd identify a few competitors for each association. And now I'm identifying as 20, 30, 40 competitors for each association. Other ways that companies can reach and teach members, if not through the association. And in some cases, that's other similar associations. So especially in the medical space and the education space, there are a lot of different associations. And even associations in other trades and professions. So if the prospective sponsor is a technology company or a consulting firm, they could sponsor an association in a range of different industries and professions. There is also a growing trade press. There are for-profit expos, there are for-profit conferences, a lot of different ways that companies can reach and teach members. Obviously, no shortage of online services, whether it be LinkedIn groups, doing Google searches, AI searches, a whole range of ways that companies can push their information out there. And one of the things that's become a lot more prominent, especially since COVID, now that everybody knows how to use online video, is the companies are doing their own education and creating their own online communities. So I've talked to companies that have an online community of thousands of the association's members, and the companies are not just pushing out sales messages, they are educating, they are providing solutions and case studies to members. I think always important to add, companies would rather work with associations, but if associations have very traditional transactional sponsorship programs, companies will look for other avenues. I think another key to staying relevant is kind of what I call a quick to act analysis. How quickly is the association able to analyze, make decisions, and as you said, whether it's global political issues or changes in membership or changes in the profession or regulatory issues, is the association and its board able to make decisions quickly and really be kind of the place of choice for members as well as sponsors? And to make sure the association is not operating in silos and departmental silos, that the association staff and board are working together on behalf of the members and the sponsors. And I think another key to relevance, and you touched on it earlier, is the need for revenue and to diversify revenue. And I don't think there are too many associations now that are looking for just a groundswell of new members or exhibitors or advertisers. And the opportunities with two key opportunities with corporate sponsor revenue, there is significant opportunity for growth. And in many cases, sponsorship revenue is discretionary revenue. It's different than grants, where grants are pretty much money in to provide a project and then pays for it, and that's it. But with sponsorship revenue, there's a lot of discretionary revenue that associations can use to pay for a lot of different services. I think lastly, to stay relevant, is the need for associations to really operate as a business. So in the United States, they do have what's called a tax-exempt status or a not-for-profit status, but that still does not mean, especially when you're trying to attract the interest of sponsors, that you can't really look at it like a business or a marketing agency with different audiences and communications channels and ways to get messages out there in collaboration with corporate sponsors. So I think those are kind of the keys to staying relevant: to do the competitive analysis, the quick-to-act analysis, recognize the need to diversify revenue, and to run the association like a business.
Thank you so much. I think absolutely right. And let's get a little more deeper from here. We all know the corporate partnership and association plays a major role in the success of vis-a-vis both the parties. And so after working with hundreds of associations, what are the common mistakes you see in association corporate relationship that you think is visible and can be worked on where both the party understands what is happening?
I think that the challenge is that many associations have managed their sponsorship programs the same way for many, many decades. And it's very transactional. It's based on visibility, recognition, logo placements, banner ads, those sorts of things. And the associations have frankly treated companies like a checkbook or an ATM. It's like, our association needs money, your company gives us money, our members will be eternally grateful. And now the companies are like, eternally grateful doesn't quite work anymore, especially when the company recognizes that it can reach out to members in a lot of different ways on its own. And the other part of that traditional transactional approach is the platinum, gold, silver, bronze levels, which most companies have a strong dislike for now, because there's no competitive advantage there. So back to the need for associations to identify and accentuate their competitive advantage, offering the same thing that everybody else offers in the same sort of packages. And again, most of those benefits in those gold, silver, bronze, platinum levels are around logo visibility and recognition. And I've talked to some corporate executives now that say they can actually get as much traction, as much visibility from $5,000 of Google ads than a $50,000 sponsorship. So it's a lot easier for companies to go out there now and gain the visibility and the recognition. They don't need associations to provide another logo placement. So what companies are really looking for is to be positioned as a thought leader, to be highlighted for the expertise that they have, not the product or service that they are selling, but to be brought in as solution providers, and whether that's on webinars or podcasts or with case studies, or to be a panelist on a webinar or a podcast. That's where companies really want to be positioned, because they see that's the differentiator and that's what the company can really provide. So associations need the revenue and companies have the content. So pulling all that together in a way that associations identify the content they need And this also works well, works well for the associations because companies often have larger networks and communications channels than the association does. So if the association were to collaborate with a company around a toolkit or a webinar or a seminar, and not only does the association communicate that to its members, but the company communicates that to its customers. And sometimes that customer base is far larger than the member base. So there's a great advantage in truly partnering with companies and not just bringing them in as a sponsor for the revenues. So I have a slide in one of my PowerPoints that talks about the word partner being a noun and a verb. And I think often associations have used it as a noun. Oh, that company is our partner. They give us money. Instead of using partner as a verb and truly bringing in those companies as partners, as thought leaders, as solution providers. Because the reality is, the association's members and the sponsor's customers or clients are the same people. So members of any trade or profession may be looking to their association for solutions. They may be looking to companies and the sponsors of the association for solutions.
And this is so valuable, and I'm hoping our association leaders are listening to this, and also to take it a little more further, to create a balance to see how things are. What sponsorship model you think quietly dying, but association that's still selling it because it's convenient, you don't have to reinvent a lot of things, and sometimes it's not because they don't want to, or maybe they do not have the tools or the time to really look deep into it. So, but knowing it, which are the sponsorship models that are dying, association leaders may be able to correct course. What do you think these are?
So the model is, I think that the proof that the traditional model is dying is that companies aren't spending the money on that model that they used to. And it's not because companies are cutting back on their sponsorship expenditures. And I've talked to a lot of marketing executives at companies, and I said, well, are you cutting back on your sponsorships? I have a client who says you're no longer sponsoring their association anymore. And the companies are saying we are spending as much or more on sponsorships. However, we are cutting the number of associations that we sponsor. So if it is platinum, gold, silver, bronze, logos, the companies are like, we're going to find a different association that has a different model. So companies really want to partner with associations. They have money to partner with associations. And the good news is for associations of any size, and everything I really talk about with sponsorships can be applied whether the association has 3 staff or 30 staff or 60 staff, because it can be started small. It doesn't require a whole infrastructure built up to launch a sponsorship program. My recommendations is to start a sponsorship program internally first. What do members need? With all of those changes we've talked about, geopolitical, environmental, social, regulatory, governmental, what do members need that the association doesn't have time to provide? And I think with all those changes nationally and globally, there's not an association anywhere in the world that has all the answers for all the members all the time. So identify the 3, 4, 5 things that members really need more information about, more solutions about that the association's not currently providing. And then look for companies that have that expertise. So is it a transportation issue? Is it an environmental issue? Is it a governmental regulatory issue in your country? Do the research on a company's website. See what expertise they have that could be useful to members, and also look, at the sponsors and exhibitors and advertisers that your association currently has that are kind of the bigger players. They have the biggest booths, or they buy the most number of ads during the year, or they buy some a la carte sponsorships of lanyards and other things during the year. And after doing that research, go to those companies, not to sell anything yet, but for an exploratory conversation. So call the company and don't start off by saying we're selling gold, silver, bronze sponsorships to our convention, but say we see that your company has expertise in something that our members really need more expertise in. Can we have a conversation? So that's a differentiator right there. So we're not sending the gold, silver, bronze prospectus. We're saying we'd like to have a conversation. And then to ask companies in those conversations and focus on asking, listening, following up, and listening. So doing far more listening than talking. But to ask questions like, what are your company's business objectives and marketing goals? And how do you want our members to perceive your company now that they're in the future that they're not perceiving you? What change would you like in the way you're perceived by members? And does your company want to reach a segment of members? Because again, traditionally, we've figured, well, the more members a company reaches, the happier the company is. And that's often no longer the case. Companies will say, if we really want to reach the HR directors and your members of a certain size in a certain region of the country, if we can reach those 40 people, that's more valuable than reaching 400 or 4,000 people. So asking them if they want to reach a segment of the members, and asking them how they define sponsorship success. What would be a real sign of success at the end of the year, or even a model of another organization they sponsor where they define success, and asking those types of questions, follow-up questions, a lot of listening, a lot of taking notes. And then at the end of that conversation, I thank the companies for their time, and I schedule a call for a week later. So I don't offer anything during that call. I don't rush in and say, oh, we could do this, we could do that. But I take all those notes and I go back to the staff, and whether it's 3 staff or 30 staff or 2 departments or 5 departments, and I talk to the staff about what could we do to help this company achieve their goals. And ideally, hopefully those goals are more than just we want to sell more product, but we want to be positioned differently. We want to reach the segment, and to ask the staff who have expertise in the conference and in social media, and in marketing and membership, what could we as an association do, almost like a marketing agency, to fulfill that company's goals, and each company differently, and also focusing on year long, not just the conference. So while there will definitely be some companies that will say, oh, we just want to exhibit, just send us, what the rates are. More and more companies are saying, great conference. That was 3 days. What about the other 360 days of the year? How can we work together year long? So to have that conversation with staff, put together a proposal, go back to the company and say, when we talked last week, you identified these 5 goals. We put together a proposal that we believe addresses your 5 goals, and to talk about it. And then it's a discussion and a negotiation. But that's when the companies are like, wow, they really listen to us. They're not just asking for money because they have a revenue shortage on their conference. They're really talking about a partnership. And it's not always going to work, like all partnerships don't. But by focusing on the company's goals, focusing on year-long benefits, focusing on how that company will look like a real solution provider to members by meeting those member needs, that's what also will lead to renewing that sponsorship at the end of the year, where the company will say, yes, we identified those 5 goals, we've achieved those 5 goals, and then at the end of the year to have the conversation again and to say, has your company's goals changed? Do you want to reach different segments? How did it work last year? What should we do differently? But having that conversation, because so often companies will say, the only touch point we really have with the association is they sell us a sponsorship for their conference, and then they send us a thank you email afterwards, and then we don't hear anything until they need money again.
Yep, that's so true. And time and again, I see this. Of course, there are some great cases also, but what you mentioned is absolutely true. We sometimes look at corporate companies as the cash cow, but at the same time fail to build relationship, not just for that event, but if we could have a 365 days relationship with them and listening to them. So keeping that in mind, what percentage of association sponsorship revenue you think actually at risk in next 3 to 5 years?
Oh, good question. Association sponsorship revenue at risk. I would say a lot of it. Now, again, there will be companies that'll say all we want to do is get our logo on the lanyards or the tote bags at the conference, and they're good to go. But I think the other way to look at it is, what is the potential for growth? So even when associations say, our sponsorship revenue is holding in there, it's pretty much the same, or it's 10% more than it was last year. I've worked with associations where we've transitioned from, and again, scale this up or scale this down based on the size of your associations, but I've worked with associations where we have transitioned $5,000 conference sponsors to $40,000 year-long sponsors. So it's both a question of what current revenue do we risk losing in the next 3 to 5 years, but it's also the question of what could the growth be for the next 3 to 5 years. So if we just look at that one example with one sponsor that went from $5,000 or $7,000 to $40,000 times 4 years, that's a lot of money over 4 years. And then if you multiply that times 3, 4, 5, 6 annual sponsors. So I think that the biggest missed opportunity or risk for associations is not recognizing the revenue potential. Because companies will spend more. Again, it's a negotiation. So companies are not just going to walk up and say, oh, we're going to sponsor for 40,000 instead of 5. And many of those companies will also say, we're not going to spend a penny more. And I've had a lot of instances where companies are like, this is all we spend on sponsorships. And I'll say, well, let me just have a conversation with you. And in many cases, the companies will say, oh, well, first of all, we didn't realize how much we were spending last year. We didn't know we were buying some ads and they exhibited each of your 2 conferences and we're sponsoring these other things. And when I was transitioning an association to a larger sponsorship model a number of years ago, the sponsorships were kind of in the $70,000 range. And we called some of the companies and we said, well, here are your goals. Here's how we can achieve your goals. It would be $70,000. And they said, well, that's crazy. We could never spend that much. And I said, do you know that you spent $57,000 last year in all these bits and pieces during the year? So again, moving from $57,000 to $70,000, and again, scale it up or down based on the size of your organization, but that's a nice amount of revenue. So I think the biggest risk is leaving money on the table. Companies that will spend more, they are spending that money now. They will either spend it on their own with their own webinars and their own online communities, or going to for-profit expos and conferences, or they may spend it with your association.
So do you think association, well, absolutely well taken and absolutely valid, but do you think associations are less creative in terms of packaging their offering? Of course, they want to treat their corporate companies or sponsors as partner, but in reality, they also treat them as a vendor. Why does this disconnect persist? Is it the lack of information or lack of empathy? What do you think?
I think that the current model persists because we as associations have done it for so many years, so many decades, and it's hard to change. And there's also a little bit of fear among staff and board. Are we selling out? Are we endorsing? Are we favoring one company or another? And somebody said to me once, well, those companies just sell stuff. Our association educates. And I don't think that's true. Associations sell all the time. They sell memberships. They sell conference registrations. They sell publications. They sell all the time. And the companies also educate. So you go to many corporate websites now and sponsors websites, and they'll have educational videos and tutorials and case studies. So companies are educating and selling, associations are educating and selling. Why not partner and do that together? Because again, the companies really value those relationships with associations and will pay more for those relationships if they are not the traditional transactional. So if there really is the listening, the discussing, the exploring, the customizing, the year long, and actually this makes it easier for some associations. So again, a large association where I used to work, we had a model where we had 300 sponsors. We had conference sponsors. We had webinar sponsors. We had some year-long sponsors. And the new model was 20 year-long sponsors and no other sponsors. So we eliminated, many of the companies would continue to exhibit or advertise or whatever. This made it much easier for the staff because then they were managing 20 sponsors instead of hundreds of sponsors. And much higher value for members because we were really working with those 20 sponsors on solutions and webinars and workshops and research to benefit members. So if we look at it from the standpoint, what is of greatest value to members and will advance the mission of the association? And there are a lot of different ways associations can do that. And one of them is to partner with the companies that already have, they're doing the research and development, they're doing the customer analysis, they know what's keeping members up at night. I was sitting in with the association a few years ago on what they call their corporate advisory council. So it was a meeting of the association's board of directors and their top 15 corporate partners, year-long corporate partners. And one of the questions for after the lunch break was, what are the biggest challenges facing members of our association, the medical association? What are the biggest challenges facing members? And as they went around the room and the association's board members and the corporate partners each answered the question, I realized that if I had been blindfolded, I would not have known who was answering the question, because the board members and the corporate partners identified the same issues around, providing quality care for patients, insurance issues, regulatory issues. So then after they identified those top issues challenging members, the board members and the corporate partners said, well, how can we work together to solve those problems for members?
So taking the hints from there, Bruce, you have been advising several associations. Are you privy to of conversation like what corporate sponsors are actually complaining about privately, but rarely say publicly? Are you privy to some of this?
Well, I am, and the part of the work that I do with association clients is to do confidential one-on-one interviews with their corporate partners, as well as some of their board members and staff. So I always start those conversations by reminding folks this is a confidential one-on-one discussion, and the information that I glean from the corporate partners, I then pull together, in a report for the client, and I'll say, here's what many of your corporate partners said. And, what I've been hearing over the years is that many companies are saying it's too transactional. It's about logo visibilities. It sounds like the organization is just treating us like a cash cow. They just come to us when they need money. And what's also interesting is I often kind of wrap up those conversations with the sponsors, and I'll say, well, of all these things that you just identified, is there anything else the association could do that would make your sponsorship of the association more valuable? And what I often hear from the corporate sponsors is, if we could have like a quarterly check-in call with the association staff, that would be nice. So in some cases, these are companies that are sponsoring $50,000, $150,000, $250,000 a year. And the association staff isn't even scheduling just a quarterly call to talk about what's new with the association, what's new with the members. Companies really want to be part of the conversation. They don't want to just sponsor the conversation. So when we call companies and say, well, would you like to sponsor this webinar? And we'll put your company's logo on the first slide and the last slide. And the companies are like, there's no real value there. Could we be part of the conversation? Could we be a panelist on that webinar? Could if your association is setting up a task force on a key issue that impacts your association and our company, could somebody from our company be on that task force? Companies want to be part of the conversation with the association. They don't want to be outside just writing a check.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's where the true partnerships flourish. And if association do not think sponsorship in the way, in a true partnership model in the next few years, what do you think is the real consequences for them?
Well, it's back to that competitive analysis that we talked about earlier. Companies will either sponsor other associations because they have many choices. I know one of those choices here in the United States, since there are many state societies of association executives, some of the companies are saying, well, we're not going to sponsor the national anymore. We're going to sponsor 3 or 4 of the states because it's a smaller group, better conversations, a lot less expensive. So with that competitive analysis in mind, companies will sponsor other associations or they'll spend their money elsewhere. But companies will continue to do outreach. Will continue to want to reach members. And whether that is through your association, through a different association, through the company doing its own webinars and podcasts, or going to for-profit trade shows or conventions, or in some cases, we've seen companies over the years that do their own conferences. So, and they'll invite a select group of members to those conferences. So I have talked to associations when I said, well, you know, your association is talking about the need for revenue growth from sponsors. What are the implications if you don't get that new sponsor revenue? What will the implications of that be? And there are associations that have told me, well, we may have to lay off a staff person next year if we don't get more revenue. So it always goes back to member value. What do members need to be more successful? And I think the conversation with association staff and boards are how can we focus on member needs and bring in sponsors to help us meet those needs?
Absolutely. And I think this is not just applicable to US. I think globally, associations are struggling with this particular area. And the way corporate companies, and I also feel that the way the corporate companies are able to evolve faster because they are profit driven. So they have to make many such activities. Whereas association majorly also slow in that pace because they're also considered only mission driven. Again, example, this is not sacrosanct, but at the same time, this advice that you are giving is not just applicable to US association, but our Asia Pacific region also, which is at the moment is becoming a center point due to the geopolitics things. And as we see next couple of decades, I personally feel is going to be Asia Pacific's, future. And the association in that can really play not just a role of bringing people together, a member service, but they could certainly solve a lot of societal, bigger issues. And in that journey, having a robust understanding, planning, how they can work closely with corporate companies and their sponsors in terms of 360-degree or 365 days engagement model. It will go a very, very long way, not just association, companies, but also members at large and their own society at large. So thank you for giving that those insights. It's very, very valuable. To come to the end of it, if you have to give us one brutally honest piece of advice to association relying heavily on sponsorship today, what would it be?
I think one of the biggest opportunities for growth in sponsorships for associations is recognizing companies truly want to partner with associations. They have money to partner with associations. But companies are measuring the impact of their sponsorships. And whereas years ago, companies, when I would ask them, why are you sponsoring? How are you measuring? And they would often say, well, we sponsor for 10 years. I guess we'll continue to sponsor this year too. And now companies are doing a lot of measuring. And it is, as we said, so competitive. And but I think it's always important to start with members first, start with the association's mission first. And how can our association build a sponsorship program as a business model, as a program in the same way that an association would create a research initiative or a conference initiative or a new member service initiative, to really look at a traditional business plan. How can we create a business plan? What would it cost? What are the needs? Who are the competitors? How would we staff it? Who would the audience be? Who would the stakeholders be? The buyers be? Who would the sponsors be? And to really create that business model, but always within the context of what is the association's mission and the needs of its members. And that need to, as part of that business model, to be quick to act. Because as things change, as members' needs change, as sponsors' needs change, important for associations to be up to date and meeting the needs of those sponsors to avoid the risk of those sponsors going elsewhere. So huge opportunities, but definitely even with a small staff or a medium-sized staff, start small, reach out to some companies, have those exploratory calls, huddle with the staff, get with your staff, and board and talk about how you can meet the needs of those companies, and negotiate and start partnering. And as the program grows, then associations can, in some cases, hire more staff to work on the program. So, and as you look at those revenue opportunities moving forward, if there is an opportunity to increase a number of tens of thousands of dollars or in your currencies every year, multiplying that times 3-5 years, the sooner an association starts, the better, because associations that wait another year or two, that's another year or two of lost revenue.
Well, this has been a tremendous mind-opening and enriching for me personally, and I'm sure for the people, those who are listening to it. So, Bruce, thank you once again for your time and for sharing your valuable perspectives. And to everyone joining us, thank you for tuning in. We look forward to continuing this conversation with you in our next episode. Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate
My pleasure.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.